But if you're a real PC gamer, your screen should be more stats than it is gameplay. So you've got your big old graphics card, you've got your big old CPU, motherboard, and even RAM, which I don't freaking have in this motherboard right now. But what are these doing when you're playing a game? What is the limiting factor, and can you actually work around that to make your games run a little bit better, get a little bit more out of your hardware? I get this question all the time in my videos when I show off things like a metric like GPU busy that literally shows you if your GPU or your CPU is limiting your game performance. Things like the VRAM consumption in the top. In my recent video about frame generation, I showed stats that were like how much latency is in your system. Is frame generation going to give you a better experience versus native resolution or not? I also showed this overlay, which literally shows you your before generated frame rate and your after generated frame rate. Really cool stuff. Then how do you actually use these metrics to identify issues your PC could be having and mitigate those things to get the best possible performance? And it's extremely important nowadays if you don't want to get scammed or if you want to get the best value out of your hardware to not get tricked by the things that some of these manufacturers are saying, like frame generation is incredible. And you can figure out these things if you have stats. Is this actually a better experience or not? It's extremely important to know what's actually going on with your computer. We're going to do this in 3 levels: easy, medium, and hard. Basically, as you go higher up, you're going to get more and more control and more stats available to you with these overlays in your game. But you can get some really easy and tons of information with ones that are built into your system. And that's why I want to show you these. Let's jump in with level 1. Right now I'm in Black Myth Wukong on the RTX 4070, just at high settings, 1440p. As you see in the upper left corner of the screen, there is an FPS counter, and this one is built into Steam. And this overlay is actually a lot more powerful if you configure it just a little bit. So if you want to look at this, you just go to Steam, up in the upper left, go to settings, and you're going to go to in-game. When you do that, you scroll down just a little bit and you'll see show performance monitor. You can turn this on and off. You can choose where does it appear on the screen. I'm going to choose the upper left so it's easy to see. And you have a bunch of different little options you can do. You can do text scaling, so I can make it really tiny. Really tiny, man. That's an Ants FPS counter. And you can also turn up and down the background opacity, which I basically usually have it around here. And this is a very simple thing up in the left right now, but you can configure it to show you a lot more. Like you just click this drop down, it can show how stuttery your game is. This is just FPS details. This is what I showed you guys in the frame generation video to show before and after generated frame rate. Now frame generation is on, and you see that we're getting a base frame rate of like 55, 56, and then it's being generated up to like 110, 112 because it's 2 times frame generation. So this for one can show you, is your game smooth and responsive? Like is it confirming what you're feeling? And based off you're using FSR or XeSS frame generation, it can show you which one you are using, because some games are a little bit devious too. They're gonna default to put frame generation on to make you think that you're getting better performance than you are. So you wanna make sure that you have that off and actually see what it's like to not play with frame generation, or it can just diagnose that issue for you right away. So that's a hugely powerful stat, but the Steam overlay is more powerful than just this because you can go in here as well and enable more details to be shown. We can see FPS details like we just had, also our CPU and GPU utilization, or we can take it another level, almost everything that you would honestly need to know. So your CPU utilization, CPU clock speed, it shows your low point and your high point for your clock speed. It shows your GPU utilization, which you see that we're at about 98% right now. Our GPU temperature, our VRAM consumption that is available and also being used by the current game, which is about 8.4 gigabytes right now of 12. So we're comfortably not having any VRAM problems right now. It also shows your system memory. We're in Cyberpunk now, and if you see the bottom left corner of the screen, we're at extremely low settings. Like we're on medium settings, which for a 4070 is pretty low. Then we're also at 1440p, but with insane ultra performance upscaling. Let me just show you in the settings, ultra performance, which I'm pretty sure is like 33% scaling, which means we're upscaling from like 540p or something up to 1440p, which is insane. The GPU is barely having to work at all. The 4070 is barely having to do anything. And we're getting extremely high frame rate. Why can't it get more FPS? Why is my GPU stuttering despite the frame rate being extremely high? See, we're actually getting it limited by the CPU and not the 4070 right now, despite us being on a 9800 X3D, the fastest gaming CPU in the world. But this can especially apply like if you're not on the fastest gaming CPU in the world. And you see this in so many games where actually you get CPU limited. Usually accurate way to find out if you're being CPU limited or not, you don't know by how much exactly, that the GPU isn't fully being utilized because of the thing up there. It says the utilization is 89%. I wouldn't really trust the utilization of the CPU. This doesn't necessarily mean that your CPU isn't being pushed to the limits. Is at about 69%, nice, 66% utilization, but our CPU has 8 cores, all right? And that means that this is trying to use as much of the CPU as possible. CPU doesn't always end up being completely maxed out. It's like extremely hard to optimize your game to work in that way. So this is as much as our CPU can be used, and you can see that because our GPU isn't being used any more than it is. That's a basic thing that you can use the FPS overlay or the stats overlay in Steam with, and this is built right into Steam. But this is not the only thing that is built into your computer that can show you some extremely useful stats, because both Nvidia and AMD have built-in overlays for their graphics cards built into the driver. Now, I'm not even sure if Intel does. I might have to check that and confirm this in post, but they've changed some of their stuff over time. Now, I get questions about this one all of the freaking time, and it's the latency measurement that I have in the upper left corner or wherever I move it onto the screen of whatever the heck in video that I am putting it in. This is only your PC latency, which means end to end, once the mouse goes into the computer, the input to before it gets outputted into your monitor. And this is the Nvidia overlay. So let's go ahead and open up the Nvidia app. I'm gonna go ahead and minimize these other things, download it, and this can update your drivers. It can do some system settings like with your monitor and all that. It also has the overlay built into that. We press Alt-Z to open the overlay, or if for whatever reason the overlay is not working, then you can click it here in the driver and it will load it up and make sure that's actually running on your computer. Then if you want to use it in game, yeah, you can go over to the overlay and you can enable it yourself manually by pressing this button here. But the default hotkey for enabling it in your game is by pressing Alt and R in the top right corner of the screen. It now has these stats. This is how it works and looks by default. And it gives you some basic things, like we saw that GPU and CPU utilization. It also shows your system latency up there in the top right corner of the screen. So again, go ahead and press Alt-Z to bring up the overlay, and then press statistics in the bottom left, and you will see a statistics view. We can change it to advanced, which now shows the frame rate. It also shows our 1% lows. If that number goes lower, then it's stuttering more frequently than your normal average FPS. And you also see now that you have your GPU stats with the temperature, clock speed, voltage, which is interesting, power consumption, fan RPM, which is something that the Steam overlay couldn't show you, and also the VRAM clock speed. It's a different kind of latency as well. This one is the render latency as well. So you have one that's very small number because this is just the GPU rendering a frame. And then you can go back and change some different things. You could do custom. Like for example, I have just latency up in the top right corner because I get the stats with other things on my system. If you want it to be a little bit more reasonable, I just went back to the basic overlay. I'm gonna go here to configure heads up display. The font size, we're gonna make that larger, because it still isn't that distracting in my opinion. And then you can also turn up the background opacity up to, I usually do 100%. And if you want to change the position, then you change it here. You can make it go all the way down. And if I were to come back into game, then it's like, oh, the overlay is kind of like in the middle of the screen. You might be wondering, how does Nvidia come up with that latency measurement? And this won't work in every single game. Nvidia gets this measurement from their Reflex low latency technology. As you see, it is off right now. I did just turn it off, so you'll see the latency is a little bit higher than it was before, but we're at about 30 milliseconds of latency. And then if you go here and then turn on Reflex, it basically synchronizes your CPU and your GPU and trying to get the best latency possible. As you see, we dropped by like 12 to 13 milliseconds of latency, almost in half, which is pretty cool. Which means that you're not going to be able to see the latency measurement if the game doesn't support Reflex. Like in Expedition 33, I'm on the RTX 4070 still, but we're at high settings at 1440p. As you see in these settings, there is no sign of an Nvidia Reflex technology in here. And as I mentioned, you go ahead and turn on the overlay and you don't see a latency measurement. That means you can't detect the latency, at least with Nvidia's built-in tools. Then there's other games like Last of Us Part 2 or any of the Nixies like Sony ports like Ratchet and Clank, Horizon Forbidden West, Last of Us, actually not Last of Us Part 1, the Spider-Man games as well. We're not detecting the latency at all with the Nvidia Overlay, which means reflex isn't working, but these games do have reflex in them, and they allow you some other options, which I think this is the setting that most games actually have by default if they have reflex, and it is off with markers. So basically, if you want to turn it off in other games, it'll still allow the GPU or the driver to still go through and find the latency that you're getting, but it doesn't actually have reflex enabled right now. We're now getting a latency measurement of like 34 to 35 milliseconds without reflex on right now. And we can change that and say reflex on. Then again, we're gonna get a different latency measurement because the reflex technology is now reducing our latency because it wasn't enabled before, but it's just showing the measurement that it was getting without it on. If you see here, it's like a pretty long line of stats that can be pretty hard to read. Well, you could set this up so it is a double layout. You can also set it so it is a stacked layout, which I think this is maybe the easiest way to read it. This is the Nvidia Overlay, and it is extremely useful. It can literally provide settings and metrics that aren't available to you unless you get it through Nvidia's app or Nvidia drivers, because they have access to these type of things. But what does AMD have to offer on their side? I'm gonna rip this GPU out and install the AMD one. Okay, I just threw in the RX 9060 XT. Obviously that's an AMD graphics card. So let's hop into Black Myth Wukong, where now you can go to the Adrenaline software by pressing Alt-R. All right, and I did just drink a potion in the background. I don't know if you saw that. This is the AMD driver software. Also, if you need to see this for yourself, you can also right-click the desktop or go down into the Windows search, but you just look up Adrenaline Edition. If you go to the Performance tab in the top, then go to Metrics, there is actually an overlay right here. Now, if you want to enable it, you can press it here, but the built-in key combination, or the default one, is Control-Shift-O. And you can see it pop up in the top right corner of the screen. I'm gonna go ahead and move this over to the left side of the screen by going here, pressing location, and then hitting top left. I'm also going to go into the overlay and increase the size. We can increase it up to 2 times, obviously making it quite a bit larger. By default, it shows you all kinds of stats like the frame rate, the frame time, the 99th FPS, which is the 1% lows, basically. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's pretty close. And there's a GPU utilization, power consumption, temperature. Also, it's showing my other GPU, which is the integrated chip that's on the CPU in my system. And you can see the CPU utilization at 9% and the CPU temperature as well. And we can also customize this, hop into the driver software and go to tracking. I'm gonna move my camera to the left side. FPS, you can do this drop down and show which ones actually show up inside of there. If I can add graph to this, then it'll show a frame time graph. So if there is a big jump in the frame rate, like for example, in Black Myth Wukong, I go back on the right side, and right down here, you're gonna see a frame time jump. And you saw that little spike come up in the graph, which I'm pretty sure you can make it go a little bit slower. There's also a latency measurement in the AMD driver software, but this doesn't apply to their technology, Anti-Lag 2. This is actually for their frame generation technology. Into the overlay as well, and you can change the transparency. It's actually kind of weird. You set it to 0% for it to be fully opaque. And then you can change the background to like white, which looks awful. You can change the value to like magenta. This is something that I usually have it on if I use AMD's overlay. So you can also see your GPU utilization, your CPU utilization, which could help you check bottlenecks. Now, I'm not seeing really that much in terms of the VRAM on your GPU, so you could go ahead and see GPU memory. You can see memory utilization, clock speed, and temperature, which I think would be pretty useful to have up. So it's using like 9.3 gigabytes of RAM right now on the GPU or video memory. Super easy to customize, gives you all kinds of stats and even some things that are exclusive to the AMD GPU based on the situation because it's at the driver level. So pretty damn useful, and you don't have to download anything. But what if you do want a couple of things? Like, what if you want some third-party tools that maybe make it easier to configure, maybe even just as easy to set up, but also could show you some things like your latency on an AMD GPU despite not having the reflex technology. And that's where we're going to go up to level 2. And I'm basically defining this by anything that you have to download. And the first one would be Nvidia Frameview. So here it is, and you can have this enabled in your games, but sometimes it takes a restart, sometimes it doesn't. As you see above my head, overlay for it's that little green one. You'll see Linus Tech Tips using this one quite a bit, like very hands off. You can use this to actually capture benchmarks as well. So you can hit a button and it will take the average over the time, and it will take the power consumption, the clock speed, track that over a set period of time, then export that to a freaking XML file or something, or a CSV. It is pretty easy to set up, and you can change the location by saying now it's in the bottom left. Yeah, now it's in the top right. It's pretty easy to set up. You can also set performance per watt type of things. It can change a few things, dropped frames. The thing I really like to use this for is actually the PCL metric. That is PC latency. This is how you can still track the latency of your GPU despite not being on an Nvidia GPU. It's still using the reflex technology inside of the game, which is pretty damn cool. I'm not gonna lie. Which is at like 70 milliseconds, which is insane. And that's why this game doesn't feel that tight to play, because 50 milliseconds is about where games start to feel kind of responsive. So maybe on your AMD GPU, because now you can see the latency in the top there, maybe you can make a makeshift solution to this problem. So first off, let's increase our frame rate a little bit by upscaling. So let's bring this down to quality FSR upscaling at 67%. And we're getting about 46-ish milliseconds of latency. And we're getting like 90 FPS. Capping your frame rate is actually a good way to do that. So if we cap our frame rate to 60 FPS, you'll actually see that our latency goes down. We're at like 45. Now we're at like 28, 29 milliseconds of latency. So like almost cut in half in terms of the latency. It's a pretty damn big improvement, even though we're at a lower frame rate. And the way that latency can work in games, the way that reflex technology works, is basically by being a dynamic frame rate cap to try to synchronize your CPU and your GPU in the frames that they're rendering. And if you force a frame rate cap in your game, even down to a much lower, we're at like 90 FPS, now we're at like 60, we're getting much better latency despite the frame rate being freaking lower. But you can do that on AMD GPU. That's one of the reasons why you'd want to use it on this graphics card. But this does fall victim to the same thing that Nvidia's built-in driver level latency thing does. And it's like in, say, Cyberpunk, for example. Wow, my freaking AMD overlay is like massive now, by the way. But in the upper right corner of the screen, you see the PC latency is enabled here despite it being on an AMD card. Like, what if you turn on FSR frame generation? Which would technically mean that it wouldn't be using Nvidia Reflex, because Reflex is required for DLSS frame generation. And AMD's own low latency technology is required for FSR frame generation. We can check with the Steam overlay like we talked about before to see that we're using FSR frame generation. But as you also see right above my head in the top right corner, that we're getting PC latency NA. It's not applicable, and it's because we're now bypassing the Nvidia pathway. We can't use the latency measurement. So again, the only way I think to actually measure this, not through software or anything, would be through a high-speed camera, or maybe there's some other tool that I'm not 100% aware of that could actually show you what the latency is with this. But it's functionally how it works. Nvidia Frameview. And yes, just because you're on an AMD card doesn't mean that you can't use Nvidia's technology here. It's actually a pretty cool thing that they provide. What if you want to see your CPU limitations in a more convenient and a more visual way that clearly defines if you're being CPU limited or GPU limited? And that's what brings us to Intel PresentMon. I'm going to go ahead and link this into the description if you want to download this. You just press download, easy peasy. It's going to install it just like anything else. This is from Intel themselves, so I'd hope that you can trust them, okay? If you couldn't trust Intel, then we might have a bit of a problem. Just go through the install wizard, If you want to install it somewhere else, I guess you probably could. But I'm just gonna leave default installation and install. And when you're done, you're gonna see this little pop-up on your desktop, Intel PresentMon. And now when you open that, you're gonna go ahead and find this menu, which can get a little bit complicated, and it actually shares the same overlay hotkey as AMD's. Now I'm just gonna make Cyberpunk as CPU limited as possible pretty much. And we're still not CPU limited. That's actually so crazy. I mean, the 9060 XT isn't this insanely fast GPU. So I guess we could maybe drop the resolution a little bit more or something. I don't know, that's crazy. All I can say is that the 9800 X3D is an extremely fast CPU. Now we walk to an area where there's more NPCs and stuff. You'll actually see the graph, the yellow and the blue. The blue is representing the frame time, which is how long it takes the CPU to prepare a frame. and then the yellows represent the GPU busy, which is how long it takes the GPU to render a frame. And there's actually a separation to them. If there is any sort of separation in Intel PresentMon here, that means the CPU and the GPU are not synced up. That means that the CPU is taking longer to render a frame than the GPU is, because it will never be faster than the GPU technically. So right now we're getting CPU limited. Obviously the frame rate is still very high. We're over 200 FPS. It's going to apply to you more and more though as you have slower and slower CPUs. But this can be a very useful tool to see if your CPU is actually holding back your graphics card. Is it more worth making a CPU upgrade or making a graphics card upgrade based on the type of games that you play? Certain games like Cyberpunk are pretty CPU demanding. Intel PresentMon is showing you other things like the GPU temperature, GPU frequency, fan speed, memory utilization, all that kind of stuff. You can use this as your main overlay, but I personally find that Intel PresentMon is kind of ugly and it takes quite a bit of work to make it look good. So I don't typically use it for myself, but you can customize some things. So you can scroll through these and just do some presets that can give you a pretty general idea of everything you need to check on in your system. But you can change the configuration even if it is kind of annoying. And that's where it gets us into the classics, you know? MSI Afterburner. Now I have a better program that I use than this, but MSI Afterburner is even easier to customize, and there's tons of history of people using this, so there's presets available for it, I'm pretty sure, and you can try to follow those guides. If you want to use MSI Afterburner, just go ahead and download this, and then we're going to go ahead and take the download and just drag it over to our desktop. Here's the MSI Afterburner file, and just install this like anything else. Now I fucking hate that now they try to prompt you to download Norton 360 for Gamer, because Gamer don't like virus. But just uncheck that, don't be a fucking idiot. Now as you go through this guide, you gotta accept the terms, and also it prompts you to download RivaTuner Statistics Server. Don't think that this is anything bad. I know what RivaTuner is now, but back when I first started or wanted to put this on my computer, RivaTuner looked like a goddamn spyware material. It is not that. This is what actually displays the overlay, and you need RivaTuner to use MSI Afterburner. And go ahead and press next. Next, I just use all this default install pathways. Then it'll also prompt you to install RivaTuner Statistics Server, so press OK, and go through this setup process as well. And yeah, it might download like some DirectX things up in the top left. So it's actually prompting me for an update for RivaTuner. I actually recommend getting the updates for it. Once you get that, go ahead and open up MSI Afterburner, and you should look like this. Now you can use MSI Afterburner to overclock your graphics card. You can go here to the settings, and then this is where you're gonna start to configure your overlay. Now, do you want this to show into game? Now, something to note too, I just moved my camera up a little bit. When you open up MSI Afterburner, it will give you the RivaTuner Statistics Server in the little icon tray here, or I moved it to the bottom so I have quick access. This is what RivaTuner Statistics Server actually looks like. And this will be some things that actually configure the way that it looks in your games. It will be important to use RivaTuner, all right? And the reason why this one is a little bit more advanced is because it takes some configuration. Like, it isn't gonna be there right out of the box. So we're in Black Myth Wukong now, and here's MSI Afterburner. We want to change the GPU. We want to change it to the correct GPU. Sometimes you have an integrated graphics and you need to make sure it's on the correct one. So now, yes, we actually could overclock our RX 9060 XT in here. My experience is that you might as well just use AMD's Adrenalin software to overclock their GPUs, because you can just do it in here. So you might as well just use their thing. It's way simpler, way easier, and it's actually more powerful, to be honest. Go to settings and go to on-screen display. You can see that our on-screen display hotkey is F7. So let's go ahead and try pressing F7 and see what happens in our game. As you see, there's a tiny little screen up in the top left there. Well, you might want some more stats than just the utilization and the temperature. Here you go into monitoring, and this is what's going to show. I would disable anything that isn't your main GPU. So my GPU 1 is my 9060 XT in the PC. So I'm gonna uncheck anything that doesn't have to do with that. And I'm gonna press apply. You're gonna see that it disappears to just be GPU 1 in the top left corner. Now, if you want this to be bigger, you might see in here that none of these options are like, oh, make the freaking thing bigger. It's because the overlay is provided by RivaTuner Statistics Server. So if you wanna make it larger in your game, you hit this on-screen display zoom and then make it larger. All right, so I can make this as big or as small as I heckin' want. you know? So let's make it like maybe here to see it a little bit easier. There's also a fill. So that is the background. You see how there's a black background? You can turn that on and off, and then you can change the palette that this is on. So the last one here is the background opacity and the color. So if we were to turn this down, the opacity down, so there's still a really faint black box. Let's turn it up a little bit so it's a little bit more obvious. There's still a faint black box, but it's much darker than it was. But you can change the opacity to make it larger. I like to go with like 90, at least for when I show you guys stuff. And that gives you a thing that you can still kind of see behind it, but it's mostly going to be blacked out. You can also change the font kind of by doing this, which this one looks terrible. I would just never use it. Use Raster 3D. So if you want things to show in your on-screen display, your OSD, then you do need to enable something. So here, say you want to see GPU 1 memory usage. I want to go down here and check the box, show an on-screen display, and it also needs to be checked in this box here as well. And you hit apply, and now you see the memory 1 is showing up as 8.5 gigabytes. That's just the memory that's being allocated on the GPU right now for Windows, for other programs, or anything like that. But if you want to dedicate it for the program, you're gonna hit the check mark here on the memory usage / process and hit show an on-screen display. That's going to give you the classic, you have the allocated memory that is just being taken up on the GPU, and then the actual memory that it's using right next to it. So that's a very useful thing, especially in games that use a lot of VRAM, which is not hard to find nowadays. This can help you diagnose some problems to see if you're running up against that VRAM buffer. Scroll down a little bit, maybe you want to add your GPU clock, and the reason I like this is you can actually press Control and then highlight multiple things and then use that. GPU1 power, GPU1 fan speed, for example. You can do show an on-screen display, hit apply, and all these things are gonna show up in the top. I'm gonna move these higher up. You can arrange them yourself to, you know, keep things together, a little bit easier to keep track of. Now you might be wondering, how does it know what things are going to the GPU and then which ones are being stacked under the memory slot? It's just like this big conglomeration of different stats, you know? Well, there's actually groups that are provided down here. Everything that's up here, they're in the GPU1 group. This is the default configuration for it. You see at the bottom and you say override group name. You can change what group it's in. You can want it to call your GPU a CPU. Well, you could also do that. And all of a sudden, it's a CPU. I'm gonna change that back so I don't confuse myself, but you know that also works. So you go here, you show an on-screen display, hit this button, and then you can change the color of the groups as well as the color of the actual numbers. It is pretty fast to change some stuff once you get the hang of it. And if you want to add your frame rate, for example, we can hear it frame rate, frame time, 1% low. You can add these to it and then hit these and do the same thing and then show an on-screen display. You might be wondering, why does Afterburner not show the 1% low? It's actually because it doesn't calculate that until it's on a certain recording time. All right, so here we got the begin recording button in the benchmark section up top. We're gonna just go ahead and hit, I don't know, F9. So if we were to hop into game and we press F9, then now it will start calculating the 1% low of the whatever section you're on. You can also show the average frame rate. So here is the frame rate average. This will be with the calculation as well. Hit apply, and this will be the third number that's there. That's the average, and then the left one is the current, and then the right one is the 1% low. Now say something with like the frame times. If you would want to see a graph of the frame times, that's also pretty simple to do. You just scroll down here, you go to the frame times, and this little box will say text. So you could just press graph, and it's actually gonna take away the milliseconds for the frame times and then add just a graph metric below it, or you can have both with the text and graph. So it's allowing the milliseconds to be up there, and it's also allowing the frame time graph to be there as well, which will show things, you know, just like we saw before. If there's any spikes in the gameplay, then it's going to alert you of that. You see that this isn't the most steady gameplay. There's some little micro stutters going on right now, especially in this section. As we transition into the zone, we get a big frame rate spike there as well. It's a pretty clean solution, and it's not that hard to set up. There's a lot of people that have great tutorials on MSI Afterburner. I'm not gonna go too much deeper into this because we're gonna move on to the next one. Now I'm gonna go over to the side of my screen where I have CapFrameX installed. I just want to show you this first off so you get a reference point of what this program is. Yes, this is a overlay thing and it also can capture things. CapFrameX is basically like a whole data aggregation tool all in itself. I'm gonna go and I'll link this in the description. You just say CapFrameX and it'll take you to this download page where you have the option of downloading the installer or a portable version of it, which means it doesn't install it into your computer. It's self-contained and into its own folder, which would be nice if you want to install it temporarily or if you want to move it to another computer or something like that consistently. But I have some issues with the portable one because it's harder to move the overlays and your presets over to other computers because it encrypts some of the files or like has it in its own format. It's not as straightforward. So I actually use the installer. You can download that right here. This will be the latest version, but if you do want to go ahead and get beta versions, which also exist, then you can go to their GitHub page that was right there and you can download the beta right here. You say assets, you can download whichever one is for your thing and do the installer or the portable version. Honestly, the beta versions are usually pretty stable, so I haven't really had any issues with them. CapFrameX is actually based on Intel PresentMon, not MSI Afterburner, to get these stats. So it's using that same software that has the CPU busy, the GPU busy, all of those different kinds of metrics. And you can see this in the files for CapFrameX. So I'm in the program files for my system. PresentMon is right there. When you install CapFrameX, it will install PresentMon alongside it. And not only that, but you get these really powerful tools. So whenever you capture something, like when you press a button and log the benchmark, like I do in so many of my videos and stuff, I have all these tests made out. You can then have all of your data aggregated here, and then you can expand things out, press this thing, go to analysis, and you can see throughout the entire benchmark of what happened during this run, the frame times, the rolling average, components were in your system at the time. So for example, on this test, the 9800X3D is here and the RX 7600 XT. You can put both of these, highlight them, and drag them into here for comparison. And then it will show you literally a already made bar graph to see what is what, which is pretty damn cool. When you hover over it, it'll show you percentages based off of whatever point you're hovered over. When it's in Stalker 2 with upscaling, it's getting 25% more frames. Really cool stuff, and you can change what is available. So you can change the metrics down here. You can see I have benchmarks in here all the way back from literally December of 2024. And they're pretty organized. I just go ahead and comment the settings that I was testing on in that specific scenario. But how do you use this? It's based on Intel PresentMon. As we saw earlier, that shit looks kind of ugly. Ugh. We don't want it to look ugly. We want it to look clean and nice, right? You feel me? What we need to do is customize the overlay. Now, CapFrameX, just like MSI Afterburner, actually uses Riva Tuner Statistics Server, because even when you press this, it will open it up as well alongside it. So you'll need this for both programs. Now, it doesn't prompt you to download Riva Tuner Statistics Server when you're in that state. Let's go ahead and check that out for ourselves. I'm gonna go ahead and uninstall CapFrameX and show you how easy it is to set up. So I'm gonna go ahead and download this beta. Virus detected. Virus detected. I have to go to Windows Security. It's not a virus, by the way. I guess I can't 100% confirm that, but this is not a virus. And it will output itself into this bootstrapper file. We're gonna go ahead and just agree to this license, install it. Now this project is open source and it will have Riva Tuner Statistics Server up there. It seems like it actually might have carried over my settings from before. So it didn't fully delete when I deleted the file. If you've watched any of my content, this is a pretty familiar looking overlay. Now, something that does bother me about CapFrameX is that it doesn't actually remember, or I guess try to relate settings and what they are across different GPUs. You see that we're not getting the power consumption for the RX 9060 XT, and it's because the last GPU that I had in here was actually an Nvidia one, and I had it configured for that. So now we need to go to the GPU total board power, TBP. And then we're gonna go ahead to change the group name to just GPU. You see it's coming up in the upper left and now it's there. But now we're gonna have to configure this so it's the same color as the rest of the group for it to be picked up. And then now we get to put it into the group itself. And then I have to typically move the VRAM stuff around. And you see I'm even getting a bug that even though these are the same color group, that they're not being detected as being the same group for some reason. So I have to go through and manually reassign each one. So it's kind of annoying. It's got some little quirks that are honestly pretty frustrating. But once you get past that, it is a very, very powerful program. Tons of different things to choose from in terms of this. So you see, we've got the CPU utilization percentage, the clock speed, package temperature. You see I named the group 9800X3D, so you can see what CPU is in my system, and also the frame rate, frame time, average, and then 1% lows. And if you also see on the bottom, you can change the rolling average, and you're going to see that's going to be the last 5 seconds, and that this average right here is going to catch up, and then the 1% lows will catch up as well. So you change that down here. You can have it refresh more or less often. Now it's at every half second. Now it's going to be at every 2 seconds. See, it's moving a good bit slower, and how all the settings are changing. I like to do 1 second. I think it's a good speed. And here you can also change your overlay hotkeys. So you can do Control F12. That's what I'm doing for my overlay hotkey. And then you can have the toggle configuration. So you have 3 presets. So F8 is for me to cycle through each one. We press F8. It's going to cycle through each one. And if you want to reset it, like if you were to have the average and it was a longer time, like 120, then you would press F9 to reset the averages. You see it says NAN, which I actually don't know what that stands for, but NAN, and it's going to reset the averages. We're going to keep this at 5 seconds because I like to hit a button. If you go back to the first tab, then you can set a hotkey to capture over time. This one's actually page up or page down, so it says next, which is a bit of a weird key, but you can set the capture to whatever you want, and that will give you the thing where it shows up in the left side of the screen here with all of your other tests. Now, if you have certain sections, and you want to change, say, the font size, you know, the group name, we can change it to like freaking gray or something, you know? So you see the GPU group is now coming up as gray. You can also change the value color. So what if you wanted this to be like red? You know, so now the GPU utilization is red. It's pretty easy to set up. If I want to change the group name for all of these or the group color, I can't change these all to the same thing. It's only going to do the utilization, and you still have to go through and then name each thing or change each thing individually. It's kind of annoying. You can't change things in bulk. I really wish you could. There's a few annoyances, but I really like the program overall, and I still prefer to use it because it gives you so much customization. You can also change these separators down here between the FPS and the rest of the settings. I actually have a gap. You can set that to 0, then it'll make no gap between that. It makes it way less clean, you know? You can set that to 2, and make that gap as massive as you want. Set it to freaking 7, and it's like all the way down here. You know, again, it's using RivaTuner statistics server. So if you want to change the actual size of the overlay, you can make it massive with the RivaTuner on the right side here, or make it really, really small if you want. So you can do whatever you want with this. It's a super powerful program. Now, a lot of you guys might wonder, well, yeah, it's using Intel PresentMon, but how do you get the GPU busy and the frame time things to show up? Well, that's just a setting down here. And I have this set up color coded pretty much to kind of look like Intel PresentMon. GPU active time, the deviation, and then the frame time average. And you see, this will just come up right there. Everything is just right there, real clean. Actually, I don't think you can add graphs for the ones here though. That's like one downside for it. You can add a frame time graph. You see that there's a little checkbox to put a graph in it. Can't add one for the GPU busy and stuff. That is kind of a shame. This program actually gives you a nice quality of life thing, and it's with the GPU busy deviation. So this is another setting that CapFrameX added, I'm pretty sure, or this might be in Intel PresentMon itself. I'm actually not 100% sure. But say we cap our frame rate at 60 FPS, then we're gonna see that our GPU busy time is actually lower than the CPU busy time, or the frame time basically. You also see that the percentage just went up. This is showing the deviation between the two numbers. So how much like higher is the frame time versus the GPU busy? How much CPU limited are you? You see now we're like 14% CPU limited, even though we're not CPU limited, we're just capping the frame rate. It's an interesting metric to have, and it very quickly, this is I think the fastest way to tell if you're actually CPU limited or not, and that will be most likely the diagnosis you get. It could be a VRAM thing or a thing with how the game runs. Like sometimes some engines have some weird hiccups and you'll see a deviation between the CPU and GPU. Now it's also really cool because you might be wondering, where did all my freaking tests go? There's so many tests there. How do I get them back? Well, Actually, CapFrameX is pretty smart. It's easy to back up your tests and still have them available into the program, import and export different things. So before I uninstalled this, because you might think that I just ruined all of my tests right there, I actually made this little thing. So there is different areas where CapFrameX has installed files at. For example, the documents section, we can actually just delete this. It's in the documents of your computer, of your user, main user, or whatever. And then I can just import this old version of the one I had. You have your stuff that's, in your program files with CapFrameX. But also if you go to your user, show hidden items, you'll see the app data present. Or if you go to Windows R and then you say present app data percent, and take you to the roaming section of your app data on your computer. CapFrameX also has a folder here where this is actually where your configurations are. So if you set a preset in CapFrameX, this is actually where it's stored. And I made a backup of this as well. You'll see this pulled up by Overlay. So I don't lose that. I keep my configuration no matter what. Super easy to do. And then you just import those files in there. They work just fine. So it's pretty damn cool. And that is why CapFrameX is pretty much my go-to. It has all the settings I could possibly need. You can customize it all you want. I keep it pretty simple, pretty straightforward and shit, but I want to see what you guys do. You got all kinds of shit you could put on there. I really like the program. It just has a little bit of hiccups I really wish they could fix, but I'm not a coding legend. I have no clue what's actually happening there. But my favorite part with all of these performance overlays is actually seeing how many overlays can you get on the screen, and also which overlays take precedent over the other ones. Which one are the dominant overlays? So something interesting is if you open up MSI Afterburner, then it actually stacks with CapFrameX because they both use RTSS, Riva Tuner. So you get this conglomeration over there. I have so many hotkeys now that I'm forgetting which one is which. We're in Alt F3 now. But if you see Intel PresentMon, despite CapFrameX having the same base, is actually overriding both MSI Afterburner and CapFrameX, which means PresentMon is actually the dominant overlay here. Then also you can go to Riva Tuner and you can see the Steam overlay. Well, which one is going to take dominance here? Let's move over the Riva Tuner and put it there. Oh, the Steam one has dominance over that one. Look, it's going in front of it. Nvidia's overlay has dominance. All right, 2600. And it looks like Nvidia's overlay has dominance over MSI Afterburner and any Riva Tuner statistics overlay. Riva Tuner is the most beta overlay here, despite it being honestly the most powerful. But if you're a real PC gamer, if you want to know what's going on in your PC, then you need to have all of these stats on screen all the time. If you're on an Nvidia GPU, you can also have a freaking latency thing as well there. Even on AMDs, you can turn on the Control-Shift-O and turn on their overlay, which takes dominance over those ones. This has been a pretty comprehensive guide of 3 levels of basically what kind of overlays can you use, what are they useful for, and how to interpret some of the stats that are available to you. If you're a real PC gamer, take a look at these things. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, leave them down below. Also, links to everything will be in the description if you need to download them and even try it out for yourself. I'm gonna see you guys in the next video. Hope this helps you, and peace. Wow, that was a monster recording. I've been recording for probably almost 3 hours. Holy shit.